105.5 WDHA. I'm Jim Monaghan here on the Jersey Magazine. Early December, we're still talking baseball. I have with me this morning Mickey Brueckner. He's the CEO of Annex Sports Performance Center. Tom Drown, the CEO of Total Arm Care. Oh, boy, big business going on here. And Greg Spatz is the co-founder and owner of Resilience Performance Systems. Gentlemen, good morning and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Jim.
So you put together the Baseball Performance Project. Mickey, tell us about that and how that came about.
Well, so Greg and I have been working together from my facility since 2017. They came in and have been working with us and our crew at the Annex since then. And we've certainly created a good niche with the baseball population. And, over the last couple of years, we just figured out, we have so many young athletes that we're working with. A lot of the issues that we're faced with are, pretty consistent across the board. And, through years of communicating and just trying to figure out better ways of serving, the baseball population, we figured what was a good way that, aside from serving the athletes within our facility, how can we serve others and help educate others with, some of these constantly asked questions that we're seeing on a case, a day-to-day basis. And then, we started working with Tom over 2020 through COVID. As we started coming out of that, we started to collaborate a lot with some of his athletes. And it's something that kind of grew. And over time, we just felt, like we said, it was an opportunity for us to help serve other people outside of just the walls of our facilities. So,
Tom, the name of your company, Total Arm Care, and Mickey can relate to this, having had Tommy John surgery. We have an epic of arm injuries at all different levels of baseball. What have you noticed in terms of changes of how we prepare throwing athletes?
So I think it's multiple folds. I think it's, understanding, the athlete as an individual. I think that there's just too many generic programs out there. There's too many cookie cutter models, and there wasn't anything out there that was tailored for, any individual athlete, depending on what their limiting factors are and where they're at in their development. Like, you're going to handle a 13, 14-year-old completely different than you would a 17-year-old. So providing them with the throwing program, teaching them the mechanics, whatever their limiting factors are, and just providing that to be able to get them to develop routines and get them going in the right direction, where they're able to also monitor their workloads and just get a better sense for their, development as a whole, and whatever that individual, more specifically needs.
And Greg, you have a background having worked with the Arizona Diamondbacks in their organization. How does that experience translate to what you're doing now?
So a lot of what I saw there was kind of like what I hope for what we are doing as the Baseball Performance Project, as these three different entities working together. A lot of what I would want us to do is to try and build something that some of these pro teams are actually doing, where you have wraparound services, where you're having a lot of the same messages told to you as a professional athlete. It's there for you. There's plenty of resources, and it's to be expected. It's your job. It's your profession. A lot of the kids that we're dealing with nowadays, in the gym, in my physical therapy office, or Tom's working with at his gym, a lot of those kids are being asked to do things as if they were professional athletes, and they just don't have the services, the wraparound services that we can provide that are going to prevent injury, or just give them the longevity or the development that they need, so that they can even, they could even potentially, get to the pro levels at down the road at some point, or even not even pro levels. We're just talking about getting through high school without injuries to be able to potentially play college baseball. That's our main focus for sure, is just injury prevention and getting them prepared so that they could possibly play at the next level.
Mickey, how has weight training let's talk about high school baseball players for the time being. How has weight training for high school baseball players changed? I know years ago it seemed to be that kids were handed the football program for weightlifting, which kind of is mind-boggling, but that is a lot different these days. What have you noticed?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is the considerations you make for a thrower, more or less with a lot of their upper body strength. I think from a lower body perspective, as long as the athletes can, get in and out of their hips and do the necessarily things that they need to do from a loading standpoint and an unloading standpoint, whether it's a pitcher or a hitter, if they can do those things and move well from a foundational level, then we can push strength on a lower body scale just like we would any other sport. Obviously there's a point at which chasing too much strength has diminishing returns. So, somebody who's been training for many years, you kind of have to prioritize other metrics of improvement at that point. But for a young athlete who has a young training age, we can push strength and drive output and a lot of that stuff and see, marketed quality improvements. But from an upper body perspective, it's just a matter of, choosing better movements, not using barbell bench pressing and overhead pressing, doing things that are going to allow the shoulder blade and the humerus to work together, doing things that are going to emphasize that congruency between the scap and the humerus, where a general football program is, your typical bench, squat, and deadlift, mainly working on hypertrophy and power and strength. We do to an extent with a lot of that stuff, but a lot of us, what we're trying to do is create good, efficient movers, because at the end of the day, you could be a big, strong athlete, but if you don't move well, you're limiting not only your performance on the field, but you're also increasing your risk for injury. And I think that's the biggest dichotomy between getting stronger, but balancing the act of moving well and creating good functional strength when it comes to, overhead throwing athletes. So,
Tom, that moving well and for an overhead throwing athlete and the arm strength, how does that translate into increased velocity, which I know kids are chasing left and right, or in fact, does it lead to an increase in velocity?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the better that the athletes are able to move, the more efficiently they're going to be able to move. The harder that they're going to be able to throw at the end of the day. I mean, sequencing is probably by far the most important thing when assessing the throw. We need to make sure that they're getting in good positions. Are they sequencing properly? Are they moving well? Are they getting into good positions? Are they able to move in and out of them pretty well? I think all those things are very important when it comes to velocity development, and just getting them to be able to get to move in a manner where that they can organize their body. They're going to throw harder. They're also going to throw healthier at the same time too. And if we could do those two things, these players are going to have long-term careers and they're going to be able to compete at higher levels and, more importantly, be able to sustain that. So, I mean, like what Mickey does on his end is critical to how we train our pitchers on our end, because if they can't move well and there's a limiting factor with their body, like as far as, strength, mobility, movement, whatever that's going to be, that's going to affect what we do on the skill development side. So being able to talk and communicate and be able to make sure that we're on the same plan where we're able to, attack those movements, that's what's really ultimately going to be able to help them out the most to be able to, reach their goals, whatever that's going to be, whatever level that they want to play at, following, when they start with us.
One of the things that has come up in the past couple of years is the number of kids who are one sport athletes. And Greg, you probably deal with this a lot in terms of rehabbing players. How important is it for a kid to play multiple sports?
I would say very important. It's definitely something that's more and more talked about in our field over the last decade. And for me, it's nice to have a forced time away from baseball for most of these kids. They play, oftentimes there's kids that we work with who are playing all spring, all summer. Some will play into the fall, which the three of us, maybe four of us, Jim, aren't always the biggest fans of. It just depends on the kid. And there's certain kids that it makes sense for to play fall baseball. But, and then, you hope that, all right, fall ball maybe ends the beginning of November or end of October. Hopefully they get the month of November not to throw or do some sort of like deload period. And then there's a throwing program right away after that that's going to start. So if they're only playing baseball, they're essentially throwing 10, 11 months out of the year, whereas maybe they play soccer or they play, they do like winter track or basketball, they play football, like any other sport that you can play in the fall or in the winter. Is just going to take you away from throwing more potentially, or having some coaches force you to throw more potentially, as opposed to doing things like we're talking about moving well. If you can move well in basketball on the court, it's definitely going to make you, and I was just talking about this earlier with a patient today, just being an athlete. And it's hard to define, but I think, most people who watch sports, if you go watch a high school baseball game, soccer game, basketball game, like you can kind of pick out like, okay, that kid's pretty athletic, that kid's pretty athletic. You can kind of just see it. And those tend to be the kids that are going to stay healthy longer. They're going to be able to play the sport at the current level more successfully, and then have potential to play at the next level. And that's sort of the goal is like Mickey said earlier, create efficient movers who move well, build some strength. And I think getting away from the baseball field, doing other things besides just having this tunnel vision on baseball is going to be helpful for kind of the longevity piece of it, and just an athletic performance piece.
I know in past years I've run a couple of high school off-season pitching programs, and we generally start them in January, and you kind of ramp them up early. Mickey, let me ask you, for kids who are playing a winter sport and will be playing baseball in the spring, when should they start to ramp things up in terms of winter training for baseball? Not necessarily weight training, but the throwing and the hitting and all of that. How do you balance playing a winter sport and getting your body ready for the upcoming spring season?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough when you're kind of going right from a winter sport into baseball. That's a matter of like, as an athlete, what are your priorities? What do you want to accomplish? What are your goals, right? And I think that's a conversation we have with each one of our athletes. I know Tom does as well. It's, a lot of our protocols are predicated upon what the goals of the athlete are. But generally speaking, most of our athletes, they typically start, if they're a pitcher, it depends on when they want to be starting to throw off a mound. So for a lot of kids, they want to try to start throwing off a mound middle to end of January, right? So they can get 5, 6, bullpens under their belt before they go into tryouts. If you're a kid who needs to go in and impress a coach because you want to make a team or potentially earn a starting role, you might want to get a couple more opportunities to get off the mound. If you're a kid who's already established, maybe an upperclassman who's a leader of your team, who probably doesn't need to come in March 1st or whatever the first day of practice is, they don't have to come in ready to go. They can use March as an opportunity to ramp up, so they might start a little bit later. But generally speaking, pitchers, we usually give them about 6 weeks to ramp up before they get off the mound. Position players, I want to give them about 4 weeks to ramp up before they start throwing with any like true intensity. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if we can remove some of the negatives by just managing their workload and making sure they're not, jumping into throwing too hard too soon, and giving them an adequate ramp up period, you can mitigate a lot of arm injuries early on in the season by doing just that. So,
Tom, for players who come to you after their fall season, how do you manage their workload?
So every situation is unique. We definitely want to look at their long-term or their chronic loads, and then also see what they were doing, short-term. That will give us a better idea of what we're kind of dealing with and what we need to handle as we move forward. Some of them we're going to recommend rest. Some of them, they might need like more of a deload. Their age is definitely going to play a huge factor into it, and just kind of where they're at in terms of their, overall development. Every situation is unique, and we really just need to handle it case by case. So it's like, as you're transitioning into the winter, we want to make sure that they're well rested, their bodies recover. That's where I like to send guys, who are feeling any type of soreness, fatigue. I like to send them over to Greg, because then Greg's able to make sure that they're, getting back on track. They're able to recover during this time, restore any type of, soft tissue that could be damaged. Whatever that issue is going to be, we just want to make sure that they're able to transition and then start their off season healthy, feeling good, and ready to start the ramp up period from there. So it's just kind of figuring out what's going to be best for each athlete.
I've joked with Greg before that he's probably the last guy you want to see because it means that you're hurt.
That's right. It's good and bad to see people when they walk into my office.
So for WDHA parents and players and even coaches who want more information, Mickey, where's the best place for them to go to learn about the Baseball Performance Project?
Well, we do have most of our stuff we're putting out now is on an Instagram, which is Baseball Performance Project. Greg, if you can share the website that we've been utilizing, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, it's baseballperformanceproject.com. It's just like a landing page that essentially introduces the three arms here, the three different entities.
Yeah, and any of it, I mean, you could go to our individual resources. Ours is annexsportsperformance.com and then Annex Sports on Instagram. A lot of our, information about how you can get started with us or some of the stuff that we're doing is in those two venues. So.
And Tom, for people who are interested in your total arm care.
Yes, our website is totalarmcare.com. We could also be found on Instagram, Total Arm Care, and then also on Twitter, Total Arm Care. So pretty easy.
And Greg, for Resilient Performance?
Yeah, it's resilientperformance.com. And on Instagram, it's Resilient PPT, as in Resilient Performance Physical Therapy.
Mickey, Tom, Greg, thank you very much. Baseball 2022 will be here before you know it. I really appreciate your time here this morning on the DHA Jersey Magazine. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jim.
Jim.
Appreciate it.